Dr. Nordström, hello and welcome to Moldova Trade Forum. I hope you are enjoying this already as much as we are, and we look forward to hearing your views on trends in business on an international scale in the context of the pandemic and how we can make most of the opportunities that arise in front of us. The virtual stage is now all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, fellow Europeans. Here I am in Stockholm this sunny morning. Yes, pandemic, world trade, 10 years in 10 weeks. That would be the way I would summarize last year. How we took a great leap forward in a number of aspects, driven by a microbe. Interestingly enough, when we look around now, this is not a guess, not a hypothesis, it's more of a fact. Look at the shopping habits around in our various countries. Look at the way we value companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, the FANG companies as they are called. They are a reflection of the fact that we are using technology to a greater extent than ever. But we are here to talk about trade, and I think the most interesting aspect of last year is, of course, that the de-globalization of the world also was speeded up somewhat. Now, what is de-globalization? Well, let's put it into perspective. Right after the Second World War, 1946-47, the world was, of course, a rather closed place. Borders, different currencies, and what have you. We have gradually, over the course of 70, 80 years, opened the world like an oyster. And 1986, an American professor, Mr. Michael Porter, created a name for the process. He called it globalization. The fact that people trade with each other across borders, we develop entertainment systems that are cross-border systems, we build up financial institutions that are pan-American or pan-European. Globalization, he called it. We've been on that journey now for almost 80 years. And now it has come, due to a virus, to somewhat of a halt. And the question is, what will happen now? The hypothesis discussed today in the community of international trade is, of course, that we will come back, we will start up the internationalization again, but this time we can foresee somewhat of a regionalized world. Regionalized in the sense that we can see 2, 3, possibly 4 big blocks in terms of the economic system. China, of course, being one of those blocks with its own internet, its own technical solutions, and to some extent also its own trading system. Europe, together with the United States, is another such hypothetical bloc that is developing as we are speaking. With the benefit of hindsight, you can also see that the pandemic served as somewhat of an acid test of our economic system, the world economy as well as local economies. We were all exposed, so to speak, to the same treatment, the virus. And then comes the question, how did we react? Well, let's stay at the overall level first, because what we can see and conclude today is that the world economy in general, the European economy, were much more robust than what we ever thought. If we go 1 year back in time, many of you can remember what we discussed. You can probably remember that figures like 25, 30, maybe 35% of the world GDP will be lost due to the pandemic. Now, We can see today that the European economy is coming in at somewhere -10, -12, possibly -13% during 2020. Far less than what we expected. The world economy lost far less than we expected, and the projected growth, ladies and gentlemen, for the world economy, according to OECD, the Organization for Economically Developed Countries, is 5.8% 2021 and onwards. We actually have to go back to the 60s to find something similar in this part of the world. And if we look at the world economy, the figures are almost unheard of in modern times. So the growth projected for the 1, 2, 3 years ahead are indeed magnificent. I said initially that this has been somewhat of a time machine. Now, in terms of all these changes that we have seen, how much can we expect of this to stay and form a new world? I would argue, expect at least half of the changes that we have seen to change, probably and possibly more. Why and how can I be so sure? Well, from research and from other research veins, we know that you and me and all the other human beings are an energy conserving type of organism. What does that mean? It means, using ordinary language, that we are lazy. We don't like to change. And we only change under pressure. Now, the pressure came, and this time in the form of a worldwide pandemic, and it forced us indeed to change. We have changed our shopping habits. We have changed the way we meet. Look at what we are doing here and now, today using these platforms, Zoom, Teams, and what have you. So we have changed. But 6 months from now, 1 year from now, probably the pandemic has faded away to a large extent, and the new world order will be there right in front of us. And much of the habits that we have created during these 2 years will, of course, stay with us. Why? We are still lazy, and we are still energy conserving, and we still don't like to change, which means that the new habits, the new routines, the new patterns that we have created are here to stay. Now, talking about the future, it's a tricky subject for the simple reason that it's difficult to do proper research on the future. And still, all of us are so interested in it. And let me try to make a little bit of a scenario of what we can expect from the future. And I will use a little bit of a trick. And the trick is kind of simple. You start by a proper description of today, and then take a jump into the years ahead. I seriously believe, ladies and gentlemen, that you and I, and most of us today, live in a world that at some level at least reminds me of the film Matrix. And some of you might have seen that film, some of you not. Matrix is simple in that sense. The manuscript is basically us human beings on this planet, but we are controlled by some kind of force. We have no free will, when we cannot take individual decisions. That's basically Matrix, the film. Now, why do I say that we here and now live in something that reminds me of Matrix? Well, basically because we have unleashed a set of forces that basically will set the agenda for all of us in the next 2, 3, 4, 5, possibly up to 10 and 15 years. These forces are, I would argue, fundamental. They are here to stay. It's difficult to see any countervailing forces for the moment. And by that, I mean to see forces that would change this agenda. And let's be time efficient and dig right into the matrix. Number one, this is a hot matrix. Hot in the sense that climate change is a fact of life. It is here to stay. The temperature is gradually going up. We all know that. And what is the implication? The implication is, ladies and gentlemen, that we are in the beginning of what we could call a re-industrialization of this planet, a re-industrialization of Europe, where industrialization actually began in the 1840s. And now we have to rebuild every sector. And furthermore, this time we're under pressure. We do not have 100 years ahead of us to do it. We probably have to do this within the time frame of 10, 15, possibly 20 years. This will drive growth in agriculture, in the building industry, in the automotive industry, in the engineering industry, you name it, and it will drive growth. A re-industrialization driven by climate change that will affect all of us, whether we like it or not. Number two, we are in the beginning, and if I'm generous, possibly in the middle of the fastest urbanization process ever documented in human history. Nothing compares. Urbanization. We move to the cities. United Nations declared 2006 that 50% of humanity at that time lived in cities. A dramatic development over the course of 100 years. If we go back 100 years in time, basically to the beginning of last century, 1917, 18, when another pandemic hit the planet, the Spanish flu, we had 2 cities, ladies and gentlemen, on planet Earth with more than 1 million people. I say that again because it's almost magic. 2 cities on planet Earth with more than 1 million people. That was London, the center of an empire at the time, and Beijing, capital of China, a lot of people already at that time. Today, 2019-20, because the figures are 1.5 years back in time, we are at 450 cities-ish with more than 1 million people. 63% of humanity live in cities, and we're on a journey towards 80-85% of the world population in cities within the next 20 years. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a planet of cities, not a planet of countries. Now, the countries are still here, the legal frameworks are still here, but in practice, we move to the cities. And I say this today, bearing in mind that many of us were actually believing that a pandemic, a virus, could actually stop the urbanization process of the world. It did not. It has, for the moment, halted the urbanization. We get indications that there is a little bit of a halt. But above all, we can see that the prime effect has been to redo the cities. So the inner logic of the cities are changed, not the urbanization. So first dimension of the matrix, it's hot, the temperature, driving re-industrialization. Second part of the matrix, the urbanization, that is here to stay, that is basically redoing our planet. So we move from a planet of 200 cities to a planet that basically is 600 plus cities. Now, if you want to see this, and if you want to make it easy for your brain to remember, please Google nighttime picture planet Earth taken from the space station, and there you can see it. There you can see the points of light. There you can see London, you can see Paris, you can probably see Chisinau, you can probably see Moscow, you can see Warsaw, and then it's black, 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 black in between. That's where we live, the points of light. And it's here to stay for the foreseeable future. The third dimension of this matrix of mind that I claim covers the globe is, of course, the digitization. You could easily believe that we are in the midst of or the end of the digitization. I would argue that we are in the beginning. Digitization, in its modern form, started about 30 years ago. The phenomena in itself is maybe 50 or 60 years. Let me formulate a couple of things that are easy to remember and that could serve a little bit as rules of thumb for the years to come. Number one, anything that can be digitized will be digitized. This was a hypothesis a couple of years ago. Today, I would argue that's the way it goes. Anything that can be digitized will be digitized. Education, healthcare, the army, the church, anything you could think of. That's number one. From number one, and now we are coming closer to companies and entrepreneurs, follows number two. Anything that can be digitized will be digitized and copied. The moment we make a digital version of something, we can copy it at no cost at all. In practice, that means that we gradually make knowledge, any kind of knowledge, available to all of us on planet Earth. It is within reach. And interestingly enough, the proof of the pudding was actually the vaccines that we were able to develop within the time frame of less than 12 months. We had 30 vaccine candidates. Why? Because we shared and pooled the knowledge of our world, which shows that we can do it. It's just like in sports. If you can do it once, you can jump 242, you can do it twice, because you have proven with the first jump that it's possible. And now we have really shown to ourselves that it's possible to share knowledge and to very rapidly solve advanced problems. Now, for educational institutions as well as companies, this is, of course, a huge opportunity in a time where when we really need to redo the industrial base. So the matrix that is, as I see it, here to stay is a regionalized, urban, digitized place driven by climate change towards reindustrialization. And the interesting thing is, for us in this part of the world, this is a huge industrial opportunity. Now, why? Well, firstly, because many companies are now in search of local supply chains. What does that mean, translated to ordinary language? It means that European firms will look for European partners first and foremost. We will not, to the same extent, look for firms that could supply us in Asia or in China. We will first and second look for a European partnership, for a European sub-supplier, and for a European firm. Within our own countries or neighboring countries. That's the practical consequence, so to speak, of the regionalization that many of us believe is ahead of us. And a great opportunity, of course, for all of us in this part of the world. Number two, the urbanization. This concentrates the market for firms. There is a phenomenon or an institution that all of you are familiar with. We call them multinational companies. You can tell from the name, many and countries, multinational. Increasingly, ladies and gentlemen, we will start talking about multi-urban firms, because the market of the modern firm is an urban area or a city. And that's primarily good news, I would argue. Why? All of us need to save resources. A company needs to manage scarce resources. And of course, a city is usually a much smaller, much more dense place than a country. To work towards Vienna is a much more concentrated effort than to cater to the whole of Austria. So we go from Austria to Vienna, from Poland to Warsaw, from focusing on a country to focusing on an urban area or a city. A concentration of our efforts that I think is a huge opportunity for any exporter or anyone interested in doing business abroad. The digitization, as I said, is only in its beginning. And what digitization in practical terms is doing is that it is leveling the playing field, as you say in English. Leveling the playing field, making the same knowledge, the same software, and the same tools available to all of us. Now, this was a theoretical idea 5, 6, or 10 years back in time, and today I would say it is becoming a reality. And interestingly enough, the pandemic has also speeded up that process. You remember the time machine. You shouldn't forget that the tool that we are using here and now, Zoom, the conference platforms, electronic conference platforms, is an old technology. It has existed for almost 15 years, but we didn't use it to any greater extent. But now we do. And it speeds, of course, up the leveling of the playing field in terms of knowledge, statistics, insights, ideas, and business concepts. Now, globalization and regionalization. I have asked myself many times, were we ever global? And the answer to that question is no. It was an idea. It was a pie in the sky. Now, why do I say so? I say so because if you look at, we start here in Europe, at some European countries and some of the most internationalized European countries, Sweden being definitely one of them, a country that has been argued to be very dependent on international trade, extremely internationalized. Yes. Let's take a look at Sweden. 10 countries account for about 70% of Sweden's exports and imports. 4 of these countries are other Nordic countries. So about 20-25% of Sweden's export and imports is other neighboring countries in our own little corner of the world. Interestingly enough, if you look at the United States, the UK, or any other country, you can see that it's 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 countries that account for the large majority of both imports and exports. What does that mean? Well, let me be more clear here. It means that we trade with those that are similar to ourselves. And this pattern seemed to be extremely stable over time. It doesn't matter how many cool technologies and softwares we introduce, we trade with those that are a little bit similar to ourselves in terms of culture, in terms of language, and in terms of habits and consumption patterns. That means Sweden, if we use Sweden as an example, trade with the other Nordic countries. Of course, we trade a lot with Germany, of course, because we are close to Germany geographically and culturally. We trade with the UK, with Holland, and a couple of other countries. These are our big trading partners. Internationalization, in practical terms, is something that you basically practice together with your neighbors. And that is what you do the first 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15, and 20 years. What I am saying is that maybe this is the truth even 80 years later, if you see what I mean. This is a pattern that seems to be extremely stable. So in spite of the concept of globalization, in spite of the fact that China has been rising from being a very poor country into the second largest economy in the world, these patterns are extremely stable. We trade with our neighbors. And in a regionalized Europe, we will project a growth, ladies and gentlemen, of almost 6% a year for the world economy in the 2-3 years ahead of us. This is, of course, a huge opportunity for European entrepreneurs from any part of this region to build a great future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the great insights. We have received many questions on our live chat, so let's just take a second to answer a question that I find particularly interesting. In one word, what is the secret to success in a business? And is there one in this new matrix?
Yes. Create and defend a temporary monopoly. The name of success in a market economy is to create what theoretically trained people call a temporary monopoly. Now, an iPhone is a temporary monopoly. It is a product that many of the consumers, clients, and end users would like to buy a second one, a third one, or a fourth one. The client loves it. Now you have created a temporary monopoly. The name of the game, and that one word, maybe is 2 words, is create a temporary monopoly.
That is brilliant. Thank you very much for your insights and for your solutions. And I hope you stay tuned here with us at the Moldova Trade Forum.